Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing, let's talk about this purported Cuban revolution and how it may or may not change the sport of boxing. But before we do, let me just say this. If you guys can hear any squeaking from my chair, listen, it is my chair. I know these sound a bit suspect and dodgy. I'm not dropping any farts before any of you lot drop any accusations in the comment box. I just got to put it out there. It's the chair. It needs some WD-40. I don't know. It needs some thread in a bin, to be honest with you. I've got to go get myself another chair. But yeah, there's nothing dodgy going on here. Now let's talk boxing. For the first time in 6 decades, the Cubans will be allowed to compete as professionals without having to defect to another country or anything like that. It was suspended back in 1962, and there are certainly some top-level talents that are ready to turn over. Guys like Julio, Cesar, Cruz, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, a 5-time amateur world champion, probably competing at cruiserweight. He's 32 years old, so he'll be wanting to get a move on. You've got Arlen, Lopez, who's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, a 1-time amateur world champion too. He'll be competing at middleweight probably. He's 29 years old. You've got Roniel, Iglesias, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist and a 1-time Olympic bronze medalist, also a world champion on one occasion too. He's 33 years old, so comparatively he's even older than Cruz, because you know the lighter weight categories, which is a lot more reliant on stamina, speed, agility and things like that, they tend to age a little bit more quickly. So he'll definitely be wanting to take big risks early in his career, and we'll get to that in a moment. And of course you've got Andy Cruz, guys that I'm sure most of you will be aware of. Andy Cruz is a 1-time Olympic gold medalist and a 3-time amateur world champion. He is the nemesis, of course, of Keyshawn Davis. Keyshawn has been portrayed as the new star of American boxing and perhaps the future of boxing as a whole. The marquee signing among the prospects for Top Rank. Well, he'll be breathing a little bit heavier tonight, right? It's not to say that he's not going to go on to become a star. It's not to say that they're going to throw these guys in with each other anytime soon anyway. They're going to be built up and there'll be a number of stumbling blocks put ahead of them along the way. Who knows how they'll both develop going forward. But Andy Cruz is only 26 years old, so he's young. And yeah, he's a light welterweight who's going to be looking to make big marks on the scene. Is it a guarantee, however, that all these guys, this cohort of Cuban fighters and other fighters that you may not have heard of yet, you know, you can still be a top level Cuban fighter, not quite be good enough to make it into the Olympic Games just because you're a little bit behind these guys, but you might be more suited to the pro game or whatever, right? And you're not quite that superstar name, but you could be a superstar in the pro game. But is it a guarantee that we're about to see the emergence of a new superpower? Are we going to see the sport change its face forever? Are we going to see all these fighters come in and start to dominate? Not necessarily. Slow your roll, because I've seen a lot of people talk like that. I've seen a lot of people say that these guys are about to take over. Hold your horses a little bit on that. There are a few things you need to think about which could potentially be banana skins for the Cubans. First and foremost, they have exalted themselves through the amateur system, where the scoring traditionally was very different, and it's still different to an extent. Yes, you're not going to get 22 versus 22-18 scores or anything like that. It's not a case of racking up points literally by touching with the white part of the glove or anything like that. Nonetheless, you do get credit for doing things that aren't necessarily going to be considered clean and effective punches in the pro game. You could literally flick out a hand and touch him with the glove and not really follow through, and you're getting points. It's almost like fencing, okay? And fencing is a wonderful skill to be able to learn and to be able to transition over to the sport, right? The top Olympians tend to make top pro fighters. There's no doubt about that. Usually, not always, but usually. There's a pattern. If you are a world-class amateur, you are probably going to be a world-class professional fighter, because you have a skill set that you can then build upon and add to, and that skill set that you have at its core, it's very hard to master. So if you've got that talent to be able to master that, you're going to be able to add other embellishments and become a more complete fighter, right? But the amateur scoring system, as I said, is different. And so the way you also pace yourself is different. Over a 3-round fight, when you're talking about touching, it's a lot about agility, about feints. Just touch a guy, get a point, get out, high tempo stuff. Over a 12-round fight, you might not be able to get away with that because a guy will be walking you down. And what makes you dominant in the amateurs might not be able to make you dominant in the pros. And it works the other way around too, right? When you've had guys like Hassan and Dam and Jikam, who's a heavy-handed guy, not necessarily the best chin in the world, but he's a heavy-handed guy and he's fought for world titles and stuff like that. When he decided to compete in the Olympic Games and represent his country, in the first couple of rounds, his volume was too low and he was getting outboxed, and then he started to plant his feet and really hurt the guy. He was pacing himself and he started to hurt his guy in that final round. And you're thinking if he had another round or two, he's going to knock that guy out. But he didn't. So he ended up losing the fight on points just because the way he paced himself was different. He's looking to plant his feet, take his time, set up a shot. Right, you look at a guy like Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder's not looking to win every second of the fight in the way that an amateur would. Deontay Wilder's sitting there trying to read your patterns and line you up to take your head off. And you get a lot of guys that are like that. So that's another thing, another obstacle that they're going to have to overcome. They're going to have to transition. And some of these guys are not young. 32 years old, 33 years old. They're not young. Do they have the time to transition? The other thing, though, that you also need to think about is that there are no size guys in the amateur system. Because you're fighting regularly, guys can't afford to blow up in weight and then really drain themselves to get down to a smaller weight and compete there and then let themselves go again and walk around at a much heavier weight. As a result, people tend to compete around a weight that they're comfortable to walk around in. So as a result of that, you don't necessarily have to face guys that are significantly bigger than you in terms of structure. You look at a guy like Crawford and you think to yourself, how was he able to fight Gamboa? They're so different in terms of their size. The size of the men is so different. And Crawford's not even necessarily, he's not really a size guy at all. But at one point, he was significantly bigger than opponents. And you've seen that with guys like Jarrett Hurd as well. You see it with Berlanga. You see it with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Guys will have a lot of success by imposing themselves physically because they're so big. Well, the Cubans never had to deal with that in the amateur system. Now these guys are going to have to deal with that. Now they're going to have the natural movement and agility and skills and distance control and things like that. But you saw when Lomachenko turned over, that first fight against Salido, very controversial fight. Salido got away with murder. A lot of people feel he should have had points docked, and some people felt that Loma did enough anyway. It was a close fight, but it was controversial. A lot of people will look at that though and say, well, look at Lomachenko, as skilled as he is, one of the most skilled fighters I've ever seen. And he was unable initially to make that transition seamlessly. He had to lose and learn about the dark arts and fighting on the inside, absorb that information, compute it, learn from it, and readapt. And Lomachenko 2.0 was much better. Well, these sorts of guys as well, they're going to have that potential problem. How are they going to deal with the dark arts? How are they going to deal with the potential size guy coming inside, roughing them up, landing shots to the body? These guys are going to be very agile, as we know early on in the fight. Over 12 rounds, how are they going to do? They're not going to be able to pace themselves, having to lower your tempo, hold your feet more. How are you going to cope on the inside? And that brings us, therefore, onto the question of there are no manufactured paths in the amateur system either. Everyone has to fight everyone if you want to be the best in the sport. There are manufactured pathways in the pro game though, depending on who your promoter is. This is why I have so much respect for guys like Kambosos, guys who didn't have that leg up and had to travel around the world and do what they have to do to get to where they want to be at. I've got a lot of respect for them. I've also got a lot of respect of guys who do it their own way. Guys like David Haye, who didn't necessarily bow his head to a promoter. He believed in himself and he did things his way. I've got a lot of respect for that because a lot of guys tend to be backed and helped by promoters. Well, let's say one of these Cuban guys, because their style isn't considered to be too fan friendly, let's say for argument's sake they were to lose to a size guy. They were to get roughed up on the inside. What happens after that? Are they going to still be given a bump up? Or are they going to be in the who needs him club? If you go and beat Julio Cesar Cruz and you think, right, I've roughed him up, I've gotten the better of him, you know what, I actually want to, I know he's going to adapt to that now. He's going to learn from that now. I don't want to put my prospect or my top fighter in with him if he hasn't got a title. He hasn't got a big promoter behind him. So let's just leave him on the shelf, let him rebuild. AKA another Cuban, Rigondao, right? Rigo was a quality fighter. You used to have guys like Frampton, and listen, I'm a fan of these guys, great fighters, but Frampton, Quigg, Santa Cruz, they used to talk about fighting each other when you had Rigondeaux, who was the king of the division, and he used to make out like the dude didn't exist, right? Guys can get frozen out if they don't have a big promoter behind them and they're not considered to be fan-friendly, exciting fighters, even though they're top quality fighters. So that's another obstacle a lot of these Cubans could potentially have in terms of their stairway to stardom. There's an obstacle there. You've also got the potential of fighting fighters from an extra nation, a top-level superpower that you wouldn't have faced necessarily in the amateur scene, and that would be the Mexicans. Now, the Mexicans don't really compete in the amateur system. The Mexicans tend to go straight to the pros, and they learn the pro game young. Now, if you want to know why this is, why there is this difference in the methodology of the Mexican game and the approach of the Cuban game, I suggest you check out my video on Bud Crawford when he suggested that Canelo Alvarez doesn't want to fight black fighters, and he was accused of being racist for that, was Bud Crawford. And I explained that he's not racist for saying that Canelo would lose to black fighters. He's not talking about the pigmentation of the skin per se. In my humble opinion, he was talking about the schooling of boxing. And I strongly suggest you watch that video if you haven't seen it already. And maybe if you have, you might want a refresher. I'll put the link in the box of this video, in the description box of this video. And I'll attach it at the end, like as an end screen, where you guys can click on it and watch it if you like. But it will give you the idea of what I'm talking about here, about the different focus points, the focal points of what they're trying to do, those schools of boxing. And that matters because you're now going to be facing a guy who's a lot more geared into the pro game, and you're going to be ready to adjust and face a guy like that. So they've got a whole new host of fighters, a new superpower, so to speak, that they now have to face in Mexican fighters. That's another potential obstacle, which also brings me on to the psychology of Cuban fighters. You look at a guy like Arlen, okay, a one-time Olympic gold medalist, a three-time amateur world champion. This guy beat the likes of Pulev and Hay and Glasgow, Felix Savon and Johan Pablo Hernandez in the amateurs. You look at his amateur record, the names he beat, the achievements he had. He should have gone on to become a superstar, but he didn't do that in the pro game. And one of the reasons for that is that he ended up putting on a lot of weight, and he didn't look particularly sharp at all. He didn't look like the same guy. He did fight Vitaly Klitschko, and when he fought Vitaly Klitschko, he was very elusive, and Vitaly looked like he had problems there. Even though it was very early in the fight, you're thinking, wow, man, Vitaly's got a job on here potentially. And then the fat Arlen Solis, David Hay used to mock his weight all the time because he came in so out of shape. He used to mock the fat Arlen Solis, popped his knee out against Vitaly Klitschko. Bear in mind, Arlen Solis also beat Luis Ortiz, by the way, on multiple occasions. For the Deontay Wilder fans out there, he also beat him on multiple occasions in the amateurs and actually never lost to him. So you're talking about a potential superstar that did not make that transition well because he didn't live the lifestyle. So why would he not live the lifestyle? This is something you have to understand. The psychology of the individual, the focus of the individual. When you've grown up in an authoritarian regime where you do not even have your freedoms, your individuality is taken away. You can't go out there and fight to build a better life for your family, to try and build a home and build generational wealth if you've got this extraordinary talent to provide for yourself and your kids and your grandkids. They don't give you that option. They take away your freedom, and everything is about the nation. It's all about how do we provide glory to our communist state. And as a result of that, and not being given that ability to break free from these shackles, when they defect, or even if they don't defect, as will be the case in this case, when they're given the opportunity potentially to relocate, and they're going to earn a lot of money, and they're going to have things that they didn't have before, they're going to have fast cars and materialistic things, they could potentially go mad in the sense of, wow, man, this is like an overload. Something that happened to the likes of Mike Tyson early in his career. Something that you see happen to athletes in other sports as well that come through abject poverty. Brazil, arguably the greatest footballing international nation. Look at guys like Adriano. Look at guys like Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Robinho. These sorts of guys, huge prospects as youngsters, unbelievable talents. They get these big contracts, they start to put on weight. Ronaldinho, one of his really good friends, one of his best friends, is a famous Greek singer. And he used to be photographed literally every weekend. No exaggeration, you can Google this, you'll see photos of him. Every weekend in Athens in clubs, right? He'd be playing for Milan in Italy, he'd be flying over to Greece, neighbouring Greece, go to clubs and then go back home, right? Ronaldinho, and how good was Ronaldinho at his peak? But he was like a shooting star. He shone brightly and then faded quickly. A lot of these things can happen because it's the psychology of being in abject poverty or being subjugated in the case of these Cuban fighters. Suddenly you're given freedom, liberty, money, stardom, and all of a sudden you feel like, you know what, I've reached the mountaintop. So for a lot of these Cubans, it's not going to be about legacy in the way that an American young fighter will look at it. Yes, an American young fighter will want to come out of the ghetto and things like that too, potentially, if he's come out of difficult circumstances. But for a lot of them, it's also about building a legacy. These guys have already built legacies in their homelands because it's that idea of putting your nation at the top of the tree, so to speak, and it's all about that amateur system. So for these guys that have achieved Olympic greatness, they're already greats in their homeland. They're not going to look at it from your point of view. They don't see it as, okay, I'm going to cross over now and prove myself. They've already proved themselves. They're legends in the boxing world at home. So now it's more about wicked. Now I can hopefully try and build something for myself. I can get stardom in a different way. I can make a lot of money in a different way. They may feel that they've reached the mountaintop a lot more quickly, and then you see them not dedicate themselves in the same way, kind of like Arlen and Celeste. One more thing. These Cuban schools of boxing as well, they are geared around the amateur game. So what happens is a lot of these defectors have the luxury of going abroad and learning the new system that's designed around the pro game. So when these amateurs are now allowed to compete in the pros without necessarily having to defect, a lot of them might stay back home in Cuba. How well prepped are they for that transition to the pro game? The trainers I'm talking about, the schooling system, are they going to have to go abroad or bring in guys from abroad to be able to be successful? Perhaps their boxing culture isn't geared towards success in the pro game. Let me know what you think, and don't forget to drop a little left hook on that like button, a little right uppercut on that notifications button, and the subscribe button, drop a little 1-2 on it as well. Thanks everyone for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.